Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session as part of Furniture Talks, live at the Furniture Show and online. I'm joined today by Tony Matters, and we're going to be discussing hospitality and connecting people. It's a very conversational and intimate format. Sorry, I've been talking all day and I can barely string a sentence together, but intimate format. So if at any point you want to chip in or ask a question, you don't have to wait until the end. Throw your hand up and we can engage. But let's go to Tony. So first of all, if you can tell us a little bit about your studio, because of course it's not Faber Design anymore, is it? It's Faber Company. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, hello everyone. Thanks for coming along. So Faber, we specialise in the design of restaurants primarily. And what Harry is referring to is we've very recently just rebranded to Faber and Company. It actually reflects a change that's been going on since I started Faber. It was about 10 years ago. I think it was 10 years this year. We decided to work within a niche, so work within a very defined space. And what we found is naturally, when you focus on one particular type of client, it's quite, almost organically, our business has grown on doing more for that one type of client. So I'm an interior designer by trade, but as our team have grown, we've added graphic design, tableware, uniforms, and all manner of things really. And then more recently, in the past couple of years, we get involved in making things. So we have a workshop, we make bespoke lighting and all for our clients, all for our projects. So really the rebrand Faber and Company is to really capture that bigger picture of what's going on really.
So we'll talk a little bit about specific projects more later, but why don't we start with the bigger picture? Times have changed. We're all talking about post-pandemic realities. And of course, consumer expectation has changed as well. People want differently. So what does that mean to you? What are some of those changes that you're seeing in terms of consumer appetites?
I think that I suppose the biggest change, and it's a bit of a cliche in a way, because we've all heard this a million times now, I'm sure, which is people are buying experiences. So people are probably spending less money on things, or maybe they're getting on the property ladder much later in life, and they're spending money on going out. And I think they expect more than just, if they're going to a restaurant now, they might be going and then they might have like a cabaret on, or there's so many different ways now. The industry and sort of individuals are reinventing the idea of the night out and all manner of things really. So an experience can go from literally like an experiential thing, like that we did one last year, maybe year before, called Monopoly Life Sized, where we did all the food and beverage for it. Where it's literally a life-size Monopoly board where you go with your friends and you're walking around this board. You've got these massive sponge dice, and it's all quite bizarre and good fun. Or at the other end, it's just, I think people are looking for authenticity. I think, again, a bit of a thing we're probably all bored of hearing, but social media has definitely impacted the way businesses and brands can engage with people. So you're much more likely now to buy a product or go somewhere because you know their story far more intimately than you probably would have done 10 years ago. So,
as a designer, how difficult is it to keep up? Because right now it sometimes feels like the pace of change is ferocious, but you work on long lead times. How do you stay abreast of all of that?
I actually feel like as a designer, it's easier when things are changing, when things are more extreme. In a way, I find it harder when there's maybe not much going on, or maybe things have been static for a while. I think it's easier to see the extremes of things. And as designers, ultimately, design is about problem solving, and it's easier when there are more problems. And that sounds a bit crazy, but I genuinely feel like we've probably had our most productive 2 or 3 years since everything that's been going on. So yeah, I feel in a way, and I think part of keeping up, I mean, for me as a designer, I'm as I'm sort of progressing and, dare I say it, getting older, our team is very mixed. We've got, lots of youngsters who have such a different view of the world. It's crazy. I mean, there's things that some of our team take for granted, and they can't see that it's, it didn't always used to be that way. So for me, it's the challenges are good, I think.
And how much are you responding to what's happening right now, and how much are you trying to look ahead at what some of those changes might be in 5 years' time? And of course, you mentioned there as well that design is about problem solving. So what are some of the current problems that you're trying to solve?
I feel like there's some things that will never change, and I think there's certain human needs that are kind of universal, and I think they should be actually central to what we do as designers. So it's difficult because I think because as designers, we should be actually out in front of culture, making the things that become trends or become shifts. So it's I don't think we don't tend to think of it as following. We just do what we do, and we work hard and think very deeply about and when I say a problem to solve in our industry, it's who's the customer, what are their aspirations, who's the client, what's their business model. It's all manner of things, and I think if you're working hard and thinking hard, I think you should make progress and I suppose create those shifts.
So what are some of those universalisms then? Because of course you design projects that might look awfully different from another design studio. What are the common threads that everyone designing for hospitality should be cognizant of?
I suppose the biggest one is, and I hate to use the C word, but COVID has made us all realise how much we love spending time together. And I think maybe it's like they say, you don't know what you've got until it's gone. But I feel we all value that social time now more than we ever did. And I think, and we're seeing evidence of that. Even though there's lots of talk, the cost of living crisis and economic debt, and all of those things are very, very real. A lot of our clients are actually seeing very, very strong sales compared to pre-COVID, which surprised me because in this sort of climate you'd expect that not to be the case. And I think that's because it's something we value and we want to sort of hang on to. So for me, that sort of need for human connection and being together, I think is universal. And I suppose in a way that's the essence of it. Really, it's about thinking about people and thinking about the nuances of what people want and need.
So why don't we stay with that then and consider what social role do you think hospitality spaces play? Why do they matter?
I feel that hospitality spaces give us a space to come together. I feel that as designers, we have an obligation to create things that engage people. I feel, and maybe this is, I feel we have an obligation to create successful businesses, because if we're working for a venue operator, there's no point doing this if it's not going to be commercially successful, if it's not going to, if people aren't going to love going there and it's going to be a sustainable model, because there's an industry there, there's jobs there, there's that side of it as well. And I feel it's I think probably now more than ever, hospitality is very important to our culture, to the point where I think it's now overlapping in other areas of life, where you're getting other types of building or place where they're incorporating, what you traditionally see as a hospitality venue, whether that's an office or other types of venue.
So staying with this idea of experience then, it's important for hospitality spaces to deliver on multiple levels. How are designers also storytellers?
I feel there's a few answers to this.
If you think they are, of course.
Well, I think they are. I think they should be, or they can be. I think as designers, there's a great opportunity. I think there's an obvious answer, which goes back to the social media and engagement thing, which is people are now engaging much more deeply with a brand or with a business, and they want that story. They want, and it's a human story. So you would buy, you might buy your crockery from a husband and wife, very, very small maker in somewhere, in Wales. I don't know, wherever. I'm actually thinking of someone specific, but you've bought into them and their life, and so I think there's that element that I think when you're designing a restaurant or a hospitality venue, there is the opportunity to bring that story in. I suppose there's another answer, which is escapism. I think people want to escape for an hour or 2 hours, and I think there's a role there for storytelling, whether that's something as extreme as an experience, or whether it's something more subtle where, there are some great examples of restaurants where you go in there and you feel like it's 100 years old or something, and it feels, there's some great operators who do. Caprice Holdings, who I'm sure some of you or all of you maybe will be aware of, a lot of their venues, they're almost recreating the magic of London, and you go in there, and I'm sure they probably have a very heavily biased international clientele who go there and think it's been there for 100 years. And so that's another type of storytelling. The other one that interests me, and I think would probably interest designers as well, is the role of narrative as a design tool. So we would, for every project that we work on, we create a narrative. Now, that might be something that the customer who visits the venue sees, or it might not be really, but we actually do it as a creative tool. So, and I suppose the idea being that it's, a great example of this is Alexander McQueen, the fashion designer. All of his collections were based on a story. Now, someone looking at his a piece of clothing would have no idea that story existed, but he used it as a creative tool. So you can, rather than, if you're designing a cocktail bar, rather than looking at other cocktail bars for inspiration, you create a story that maybe it's based on a family history, let's say, and you start with the husband and wife and where they met, and you follow their life and what they do as a job and their children. And it sounds completely bonkers, but what it does is it gives you something to play around with, so that then when you're designing the space, you've actually, rather than taking inspiration from things that already exist in the world, you're kind of plucking them from this kind of imaginary narrative, and we do this a lot, and it's quite good fun, and B, it's very useful. Often the ideal is when that story does tie into the history of the building in some way, or the history of the client, or so it has some relevance.
But I guess part of the reason why we love stories is they connect to something emotional. And I know as a designer and as a studio, this idea of forming emotional connections is quite important. Can you tell us more about how you create that connection between design and human emotion?
I can. It's really hard, this. It's a hard thing to define, I think, but I know it's real. Where I believe you can go walk down a street and you could see two restaurants, let's say, and they both seem to be doing a similar thing, in that they're designed, they're sort of, they're of a similar sort of standard in a way. One's full and one's empty, and I've literally seen this. And you look at it, and one of them's a chain restaurant that was designed with and it's like a template that they've applied, and maybe they've changed it a bit, and then the other one is an independent, and it's their life and their livelihood, and for some reason, even though the actual, the product itself, the food might not be that much different, people are buying into the emotional dimension in a way, and I think we've had it where we I believe it's possible to design in emotion into a space, and I believe it's possible to use a space to communicate emotion, and I feel like actually it's as basic as a designer. If you care, and if you care about the people that you're designing for, that will just come through. And I suppose an obvious example of that would be, let's say, a hotel bedroom that was designed for a very, very specific type of hotel guest. And you think about their every need and requirement, and you think about them so deeply that you maybe think of things even beyond what's obvious. And when you design that space and you create it, and then that person uses that space, they would see something and just be surprised and go, oh, wow, they've really thought about what I need here. And it makes them feel valued. And I think a version of that happens in lots and lots of different ways. If you care about who that customer is and what they're going to experience, and you work hard to address that, I feel it will kind of, they'll feel it, I think.
And yet there's a specificity to that, and part of the problem with hospitality design are brand standards, the bane of designers' lives, because people think that you can be all things to all people. Can you?
I definitely think you can't. I think on every level you can't. I feel as a designer, I took a decision 10 years ago to try and be one thing to one type of person, which was a designer of restaurants, and really focus on being very good at doing that one thing and put all of my energy into it. I feel now we're all so much more aware, and we're all so much more experienced of going to so many different places. If you just cannot create a template for that will actually engage with people. I just don't think it works. And I think to the point where now we now actively, and this will sound crazy, anyone who runs a design business will know, how it can be quite tough in terms of keeping the work coming in, but we actually actively do not want to work with brands, and we, to the point that it's written on our website, we will not work for a brand on a rollout. We will not work with brand guidelines. We create one-off location-specific restaurants or venues or whatever it is. And for me, I actually feel like the industry is probably going that way anyway. So I feel like a brand needs to find some way of having a DNA in some sense, but then each location is completely different.
How much of hospitality design is about disruption, new ideas, in terms of giving us something to connect to? We live in a society now where there's a voracious appetite for newness. How important is it to do new, creative, disruptive things?
I feel it's important. I feel design is about the relentless pushing for making things better. I feel maybe there's sometimes a perception of what new and innovative looks like. I think you can sort of imagine something that looks kind of new and contemporary in some way. Actually, sometimes it's I don't think it's always as obvious as that. I feel it's also important that we're building things that will last as well. I think I feel there's I think as a designer, if you're working hard and thinking hard about people and what they need, then I think you will innovate in small ways, in big ways. I feel it's just an outcome of the process.
So where for you does the line lie between new for newness's sake and genuinely doing something that is needle shifting?
I think it comes back to people, really. I think it comes back to focusing on individuals, and if I think not following trends, I think, is quite important. I think as a designer, it's important that you're, leading rather than following. I feel that it should be an outcome of a process rather than the thing that you're aiming for.
And in terms of that process, I know that for you there is a science of design, a certain kind of alchemy, that it's not all just intuition. So how can one use that science to create a certain atmosphere?
This is an interesting one, and it is something I spent a lot of time thinking, and it's a benefit of only really designing one type of thing, a restaurant, because you end up just thinking about it a lot more than you would do if you did a whole variety of things. And I realized that you can go somewhere and it has a really great atmosphere, and then you can go somewhere that looks amazing and has there's just something wrong. It just doesn't quite work. And I realized that there is almost a science to creating an atmosphere. And I think when as I went to more and more venues and thought about this, I started to unpick what it is. And I realized that the two key components of creating atmosphere is the combination of lighting and acoustics. So if you, and it will vary from venue type. So a fine dining restaurant would have probably a fairly quiet, intimate atmosphere with maybe quite low level lighting, whereas an all day cafe would be light and bright and a bit noisier. And actually realizing that if you control lighting. So if you've got atmosphere, but you can still read the menu, which is always I still can't believe that I can go to so many restaurants that have a lovely atmosphere, and you look at the menu and you have to get your torch out on your phone. I mean, it's to me, and then the food. So then you're looking at the food, and you can't see the colours because it's too dark or the lighting's too flat. So there's definitely, I mean, everyone knows that there's a science behind lighting and getting that atmosphere, but then acoustically. There's a range from noisy to quiet, and in certain types of venue, if it was too quiet, it would just be weird and uncomfortable, or if it was too noisy, it would be it wouldn't work. So it's getting it in the right place. I mean, if you go to say a lively brasserie, let's say an Ivy, they're actually quite noisy. But it works because you can still have a conversation, and whereas some, as I said, a fine dining restaurant is much quieter. There are some examples. I'm not going to name any, but there are some examples of very high-end, expensive restaurants where you can barely have a conversation because they've got a tiled floor, they've got tiled walls, they've got mirrors on the walls. It's kind of, to me now, seems quite basic, but it's still amazing how often. People get it wrong, I think.
Well, I've been to, on a press trip, a 3 Michelin star restaurant that was in a beautiful space with fantastic food, and it was strip lighting. And it was like sitting in a canteen in the most unappealing space to be in. But I'm curious in the audience how many designers we have. You can maybe raise your hand if you're a designer. Because one of the challenges that designers often face is communicating this to clients when it comes to budget, how important these less tangible elements are. What advice might you have in terms of some of the vernacular or putting a value on these elements to convince the client that they're really important and really worth consideration and a decent spend?
I mean, part of it for me, it's not necessarily about how much you spend on it. It's about spending it well, in a sense. So it's. I mean, the budget conversation is a thing. All designers. No, not all designers. I have some friends who don't even know how much their projects cost because it matters so little to the client. Unfortunately, we live in a world where our clients are they're commercial businesses and they have a budget and they have to build in a return on investment. So I feel like it's important. I suppose ultimately it's about clients understanding the value of design and the difference really that design can make. Because I often give this example where if you if you gave me £100,000 and you said, right, I've got this space, it's probably not that big for £100,000, but I've got this space, and I want you to create a cafe for me. And then I would say to the client, well, that's fine. Our fees are going to be, I don't know, £20,000, let's say. Some people would go, what? You know, you're taking £20,000 out of my £100,000 budget. You're a crook. You know, sling your hook. And then they'll go away on their own and spend the £100,000 on their own. And if you ran both of those as an experiment, my £80,000 cafe would look 3 times better than his £100,000 cafe, and it's understanding, and it would be the same with any designer. That's what design does, is it creates value, like very tangible value. So for me, it's really hard, but it's about making sure clients understand the value of design. It's really hard. Sometimes if they don't get it, it's hard to explain in a way, but.
Well, we're at the furniture show, so I'm going to have to sneak this one in as well. What role does furniture play in all of this? Even going back to this idea of creating atmosphere, how do you consider that aspect of Specify?
I think furniture in all its forms is key. I mean, obviously, with what we do in restaurants, there's a lot of furniture. There's lots of chairs and lots of tables. It's one of the most visible things. It's also the thing that people touch and sit on and interact with the most. With dining chairs as an example, there's so many ways it can go wrong, and trust me, I know, because as I've been on my own journey, I've made lots of mistakes. So it's there's lots of operational and functional considerations, but ultimately they're a great tool for building in story. I mean, and I suppose not everything has to be new as well. I mean, this is the thing now, is it's particularly if we're trying to create, stories or a sense that this is already, being lived in. It's a great way of tapping into that, reusing existing pieces, where obviously there's a sustainability element to that as well, but so for sure. I mean, it's furniture is probably quite a large chunk of what we spend our time doing. So
let's take a step back, because of course you've spoken about creating individualistic spaces. So is design getting a bit lazy because a lot of people are going to the same resources, the likes of Pinterest? Is it killing new ideas?
I think there is that danger, and I think we're all guilty of it at times. I feel like it's difficult because these are really powerful tools, and there are more things out there that empower people to do things that maybe they couldn't do before. Other types of software that's more accessible or easier to use, so I think it's a good thing. But I suppose it's like anything in the wrong hands, it can wreak havoc. I mean, for me, the thing that scares me more is clients jumping on Pinterest and thinking that design is a purely aesthetic exercise, because it isn't. I mean, quite a lot of the important work that we do on a project happens way before we start thinking about what it looks like, really. And the worry there is that you see people thinking that design is purely what it looks like, and then they go away and they mash something together from Pinterest, and then they spend their £100,000 on it, and it just doesn't work because they're not connecting with people. They're not going through that process of digging deeper into what who the customer is and what they need. So for me, that probably worries me more.
So scratching beneath that surface then of aesthetics, you talked about the science of design. What about the psychology of design? How do you consider things like color psychology, biophilia?
I think everything that we do, there's a science behind it. I don't understand that science, and I don't think I will ever need to, because color, texture, lighting and acoustics, whether there's natural, plants or whatever it is. All of these things definitely make a difference. And I'm sure some really people much cleverer than me could understand exactly why that is. I actually feel as designers, good designers instinctively know what something should be to achieve a certain end result. So you could take a more scientific approach and look at their design and explain why it's achieving this sense of calmness and so on. Whereas a designer will just do it, and it's much more instinctive. I think I think there's a danger that people start copying and pasting science and thinking that will do it. So I've got an office. I've got 300 people in this office, and they're all crammed in, and it's and I'm probably not paying them enough and working them too hard. But I've got this kind of whole biophilia thing. So if I fill the office full of plants, it's going to make them all feel happier, and it's obviously it's not as simple as that. So yeah, I think it's important. I think it's important that we realise how much influence we can have over how people feel. For me, the science of it, I'm never going to pretend that I understand it, and I personally don't think I need to.
So let's talk about pitfalls then. Bad lighting sounds like one of them. Cookie cutter design, not assuming a pot plant is going to make people happy. What are some of the other pitfalls that people should avoid?
Following trends, in a way. I mean, it's obviously this is a hard one because we all see things and we kind of love them and we're like, wow, and it's inspiring. But ultimately it's about thinking. And I keep coming back to this, but for me it's so fundamental. It's about thinking about people and thinking about the people who are going to be using the space and designing for them. So if you're following a trend, again, you're sort of going back to a more aesthetic way of approaching design. So for me, that's a big one. I also I think there's an art to managing a budget. I think this is probably less of a pitfall and more of a tip, maybe. But I think spend the money in the right places. I think you can actually do something quite inexpensively, but then spend a third of your money on a amazing light fitting that will lift someone's perception of the whole space. So yeah, I mean, there's so many ways you can get it wrong, and I mean, I could probably write 4 sides of A4 of all the mistakes I've made over the years. But
so out there in the world of hospitality, who's getting it right? And if you'd care to put your neck on the line, who's maybe getting it a bit wrong?
This is risky. I mean, I think. So, who I mentioned earlier, Caprice Holdings, they high-end restaurant operator. They've got the Ivy, Sexy Fish, J Chic. I mean, there's just loads, and it's incredible. I mean, they spend an astonishing amount of money on their venues. It's hard. I find it hard not to go in there and just love it. But what they do get right is they get the atmosphere right. I mean, the place where I went, where I had the light bulb moment about atmosphere, was Dean Street Townhouse in Soho, where it's actually the interior is relatively straightforward, but it's just got the most perfect atmosphere. And I realised it's the lighting and the sound level. So for me, I mean, it's hard not to look at Caprice Holdings and be unimpressed. Who's getting it wrong? I mean, one of my favourite chefs in the world is getting it wrong, which is Yotam Ottolenghi. So
that's controversial.
Well, I mean, look, we've got all of his cookbooks, and we cook a lot of his food. But I ate in his restaurant in Soho. Begins with an N. Can't remember the name.
Noppy?
Nope, that's it. And I literally could not hear the person across the table from me. It looks amazing. I mean, literally, the toilets are nuts, like just like a hall of mirrors. These, I mean, so weirdly, from a design point of view, wonderful in so many ways, but from an experience point of view, I mean, it's just I literally came out with a headache, and I think that I suppose the ones that probably wind me up the most is some of the larger branded chain restaurants where they're literally copy and pasting a template, and it has no real appreciation for the difference between different places or different groups of people or cultures. I think that's laziness, really. Sort of, and I feel they deserve to suffer for that. So, I don't know. It just seems, there's a whole industry out there around raising finance, spending money, selling it on. That's how you make your money. So you make your money through the sale of the company rather than through actually giving people value, giving customers value. So yeah, I've probably just lost half my client base there with that question. Thanks.
Well, I want to leave a minute in case we have any audience questions. So last one for me. If you had one top takeaway, one key message that you would like people to leave with today, what would that be?
I would say design's about people, and never really forget that, I think. And the more you think about people and the more you think about who, and this is where the story thing comes in again. I mean, create a fictitious person and give them a name and give them a job, and the more you think about people, the better your design will be, because it will be just so much more attuned to what someone wants or needs. Or
Do we have any questions for Tony? No? In which case, I would just oh, we do. I might come to you, actually, and then at least everyone else can hear you. Oh.
Thank you. You were talking about things that you shouldn't be doing. Are there any colours that are no-nos, in your opinion, Tony?
I don't think there are, because it just depends what you're doing. I mean, I have colours that I personally struggle with, but I don't think there is. I think it depends what it is, really. I think there are no rules. If you're, thinking about people, thinking about experience, thinking about things in the right way, then I think literally anything goes, really.
We did have a color psychologist sitting on this stage who said that red and grey are the most challenging, which was a slightly awkward moment, I've got to say. Any other questions? No? Then if you could just join me in saying thank you to Tony for joining us here today at the Furniture Show. Thank you, Tony.